There are stories that pass like shadows through history, whispers that refuse to die, even as empires crumble and tongues forget the shape of ancient words. Somewhere deep within the folds of time, nestled in the golden silence of the Nile's eternal breath, lies a secret long buried beneath layers of sand, stone, and distraction. This secret is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a key, a compass, and a mirror. It is the remembrance of an eye that sees not with the flesh but with the soul, an eye not located in the head, but in the infinite stillness between thought and being. The Egyptians knew it. They etched it into stone. They masked it in metaphor and clothed it in myth. But time, as always, is a ravenous tide, and what once was sacred has become hidden. Or worse, forgotten. The third eye, the seat of inner vision, the lamp of the body, the watcher behind the watcher, is no invention of modern mystics or New Age curiosities. It is a truth as old as breath, known to the high initiates of the ancient world, who studied not only the stars above but the stars within. In Egypt, this truth was encoded into temples, rituals, and cosmologies, preserved not in open texts but in sacred architecture and silent gestures. It was a secret not because it was forbidden, but because it was powerful, too powerful to be cast carelessly before eyes that had not yet learned to truly see. To awaken the third eye, in the Egyptian sense, was not merely to access intuition or vision. It was to pierce the veil of illusion. It was to see through the dance of duality, to gaze upon the infinite from within the finite, and to recognize that all gods and demons, all fears and ecstasies, rise from the same hidden wellspring of being. The eye in the pyramid, so often trivialized by pop culture and conspiracies, once marked the convergence of sacred geometry, cosmic resonance, and inner illumination. It was the Eye of Horus, the restored vision of the divine child after the chaos of fragmentation. It was the Eye of Ra, flaming and pure, watching from the void. And in its full flowering, it became the eye of the self, silent, unblinking, and free. But something happened. A fracture, perhaps. A forgetting. Whether by design or decay, this inner technology, the sacred art of inner seeing, was suppressed. Not destroyed, for truth is resilient, but scattered like the shards of a lost mirror. Pieces remain. Echoes resound. But the full symphony was locked behind veils of ritual, language, and doctrine. Modern seekers search for enlightenment like thirsty wanderers in a painted desert, chasing mirages of mindfulness, glimpses of transcendence, brief downloads of clarity. Yet the ancient Egyptians left behind more than just tombs and treasures. They left maps. Maps of the inner world. Maps whose routes are metaphoric and multidimensional, requiring not just intellect but initiation. To explore this forgotten gnosis is not simply to study history, it is to awaken to mystery. It is to step beyond the linear narrative of progress and regression and enter a spiral, a sacred cycle where every end is a new beginning, and where the answers we seek are waiting in the questions we refuse to ask. It is to remember that the pyramids were not just tombs but transmission devices of cosmic frequency, that hieroglyphs were not mere words but vibratory codes, and that the gods were not external deities, but masks of inner archetypes, thresholds through which consciousness could ascend. This secret, hidden in plain sight for 3,000 years, was never meant to be entirely lost. The initiates knew the cycle would turn. They embedded the truth in stone so it would survive flood and fire, empire and erasure. Now, in an age where many eyes are open yet few truly see, the moment has come to remember. Not merely with the mind, but with the being. For the third eye is not activated through effort but through surrender, not through seeking but through seeing what has always been. This journey is not about magic spells or esoteric elitism. It is about peeling back the layers of distraction that numb the spirit, of decoding the sacred myths that were never meant to be literal, and of tuning the instrument of the self to a forgotten frequency, the frequency of divine vision. To walk this path is to stand where the ancient priests once stood, between sky and earth, holding the balance of opposites, and to reawaken the eye that sleeps in the center of the storm. And so, we begin, not merely a study of Egyptian mysticism, but a descent into the marrow of consciousness itself. We are not looking to decode dusty scrolls. We are listening for the echo of truth within our own being. The third eye is not a distant relic. It is the birthright of the soul. And if we dare to remember, the forgotten light may yet return. To journey deeper into the wisdom encoded in the ancient Egyptian teachings on the third eye is to engage with a different language, a language not of syntax, but of symbol. The core concepts do not unfold in the linear sequence of modern logic, but spiral like the golden ratio, turning ever inward and outward at once. Egypt did not separate the sacred from the practical, the spiritual from the scientific. In their worldview, all existence was one vast, breathing organism. Matter was infused with spirit, and every form veiled a deeper pattern. At the heart of this pattern was the eye, not the eye that consumes appearances, but the one that beholds the eternal behind the temporary. Central to the Egyptian conception of the third eye is the Duat, the invisible realm, the unseen dimension that lies behind waking life. The Duat was not merely a place of the dead, it was a map of inner initiation. It symbolized the hidden layers of consciousness, realms that could only be accessed through the dissolution of ego and the refinement of perception. Just as the sun god Ra traveled through the Duat each night, so too did the initiate journey inward, confronting illusions, shedding masks, and remembering the light that does not die. The third eye, in this cosmology, is the guiding light through the Duat. It is the inner sun, dimmed, perhaps, but never extinguished. The Egyptians believed that the human being was a temple, mirroring the celestial order. The pineal gland, nestled between the hemispheres of the brain, was seen not as a mere biological curiosity but as a sacred relic of divine sight. Today, we recognize it as the gland that regulates circadian rhythms, responds to light, and secretes melatonin. But the ancients sensed something more. They saw in it the crystal seat of consciousness, the place where the body meets the spirit. Their depictions of the Eye of Horus map astonishingly well to the anatomy of the brain. The brow of the falcon god forms the corpus callosum. The teardrop shape curves into the thalamus. Was this coincidence? Or was it coded wisdom, sculpted in metaphor to survive the forgetfulness of time? The myth of Horus and Set offers another lens. After a brutal struggle, Set tears out the Eye of Horus, fracturing it into pieces. Thoth, the god of wisdom, reassembles the eye, but never entirely. A fragment is always missing. And yet, Horus offers this incomplete eye to his slain father, Osiris, as a gift of healing and resurrection. What does this mean? On one level, it suggests that spiritual sight is restored not through wholeness, but through sacrifice. The vision of the third eye does not come from controlling reality, but from surrendering to it. Even broken, the eye sees. Even wounded, it heals. To activate the third eye is not to become superhuman, it is to become fully, vulnerably, awake. Another pillar in this sacred architecture is Ma'at, the principle of cosmic balance, of truth, justice, and alignment. Ma'at is not merely a law, she is a presence, a frequency. To walk in Ma'at is to live in tune with the unseen harmonies that govern both stars and atoms. The third eye, in this sense, is the compass that aligns the soul with Ma'at. It does not merely reveal visions, it attunes perception to what is, beneath appearances. And when one lives from that seeing, choices shift. Desires clarify. The noise quiets. This is not abstraction, it is transformation. But the illusion of the world, which the Egyptians called Isfet, constantly pulls the soul into chaos, into forgetfulness. Isfet is not evil in the moral sense, it is disorder, the fracturing of the unified field into multiplicity and confusion. The third eye, once open, does not banish Isfet, it sees through it. It reveals the falsehood in its claims, the brittleness behind the glitter. And it reorients the self not toward escape, but toward reintegration. To understand this lost Egyptian secret is also to recognize the concept of initiation. In modern parlance, we chase information. But in ancient Egypt, wisdom was not something one possessed, it was something one became. The third eye was not activated by reading or hearing alone. It was the fruit of ritual death and symbolic rebirth, often mirrored in temple rites, dream incubation, and symbolic immersion in the Nile. To truly see, one had to first become nothing, to dissolve the hardened shell of self so the infinite could enter. Even the architecture reflects this. The temples of Luxor, Edfu, and Karnak were not simply places of worship, they were geometric allegories of consciousness itself. From the outer courtyard of the senses, through the hypostyle halls of mystery, to the dim sanctuary of direct communion with the divine, the initiate walked not through space but through levels of selfhood. And in the innermost chamber, small, enclosed, utterly still, one stood face to face with the unseeable. Not with open eyes, but with the eye that has no lid. In all this, the Egyptians offered a paradox: the eye is always present, yet we do not see. It is not gained, it is remembered. It is not acquired, it is uncovered. The layers that obscure it are not external, but internal. Dogma, trauma, distraction. And only through attention, sustained, subtle, sacred, can we begin to peel back the veils. Thus, the core themes of this ancient vision spiral around one essential truth: reality is layered, and we live most of our lives at the surface. But there is a deeper layer, and it calls to us, not with noise, but with stillness. To awaken the third eye is to answer that call, not by escaping the world, but by seeing it anew. The veil is thin. The breath is the bridge. And within you, even now, the eye waits, not to be opened, but to be remembered. In every civilization that dares to stare beyond the stars, that yearns to trace the invisible architecture of the soul, myth becomes the medium through which deeper truths are transmitted. For the ancient Egyptians, myth was not a fiction to entertain or a tale to distract, it was a mirror, a ritual, a veil woven from truth. Within their myths lived codes, not unlike dreaming languages, cosmic metaphors disguised as stories of gods and monsters, battles and reconciliations, loss and return. And central to so many of these mythic patterns was the motif of the eye: lost, stolen, shattered, and then returned. One of the most potent symbolic narratives in this tradition is that of the Eye of Horus, which shimmers across temple walls and papyri not simply as an aesthetic symbol, but as a cosmic parable. Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, the divine avenger, stands as the archetype of awakened will. When his father Osiris, symbol of eternal consciousness, is slain by his own brother Set, the god of disorder and separation, Horus is thrust into a sacred conflict. It is not merely a war for revenge, it is a war to restore the balance between the higher self and the chaotic forces of fragmentation. And in that battle, Horus loses his eye. It is easy to read this myth through the lens of drama, to see the eye's destruction as a loss, a wound. But this loss is initiatory. The third eye cannot be granted to one who has never been emptied. It must be shattered, so that it may be rebuilt in the light of a deeper knowing. And who restores it? Not Horus himself, but Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, moonlight, and sacred geometry. Thoth represents divine intelligence, the inner alchemist. The restoration of the Eye of Horus is not a return to what was, but a transmutation into what must be. The eye, once wounded, becomes luminous. Once fragmented, it becomes more whole than before. What this suggests is radical: the path to illumination is not clean or linear. It demands descent. It demands that the eye be broken open, not just opened, but undone. This is the eye that weeps before it sees, that fractures before it radiates. In the quiet spaces of the temples, initiates would reenact these dramas, not for theater, but for transformation. They knew that myth was not myth, it was a map of the soul's journey. Consider too the Eye of Ra, often depicted as a fierce, flaming protector. In this narrative, the eye takes on another role. When humanity rebels against divine order, Ra sends his eye as a force of reckoning, personified as Sekhmet, the lioness of fire and fury. But her wrath becomes too great. She forgets her origin. She begins to devour even the innocent. And so Ra, in an act of compassion, tempers her fury with wine, transforming her into Hathor, goddess of beauty, love, and music. The message here is not simply that fire must be tamed, but that the eye, once turned outward in rage, must be turned inward in recognition. There is a stunning metaphor embedded in this myth. The third eye, when open without wisdom, can burn. It can consume, distort, fragment. But when awakened through balance, through ma'at, it becomes the eye of compassion, of knowing beyond judgment. The ferocity of Sekhmet becomes the sweetness of Hathor. The same fire that blinds can illuminate. And so the eye must be initiated through the alchemy of self-awareness. The temples themselves were encoded narratives. To walk through the temple of Dendera or Luxor was to traverse not merely space, but psyche. Each chamber was a glyph of the soul. Each column a symbol of ascent. The ceilings bore stars not just as decoration, but as reminders of our origin. In the sanctuary of the eye, a chamber often accessible only to high priests, initiates would be immersed in sound, darkness, and sacred perfumes. In such an atmosphere, the rational mind dissolved, and the vision of the inner world began to emerge. This was not hallucination. It was clarity, a stripping away of noise until only truth remained. One particularly haunting image is that of the weighing of the heart, found in the Book of the Dead. Here, the soul of the deceased stands before Ma'at. The heart is placed on one side of a scale, a feather on the other. If the heart is heavier, the soul is devoured by Ammit, the crocodile-lion-hippopotamus hybrid of annihilation. If the heart is lighter, the soul proceeds to the eternal fields. This is not just an image of judgment, it is a key. The third eye cannot activate in a heart burdened with distortion. The feather is not a symbol of lightness alone, but of truth, of seeing clearly, without the weight of illusion. In this story lies a secret: to see clearly, one must feel cleanly. The eye and the heart are not separate. One opens the other. And then there is the Bennu, the Egyptian phoenix, born from its own ashes. It perches at the top of the sacred tree near the Sun Temple at Heliopolis, singing the Song of Time. Like the third eye, the Bennu represents vision beyond death, a knowing that survives all endings. It is the voice within silence, the flash of insight that arises only when everything else has fallen away. The third eye is not merely the pineal gland, it is the Bennu within us, waiting to rise, again and again, from the forgotten fire of transformation. So these myths are not dead stories. They are mirrors held up to the soul. In each character, Horus, Thoth, Ra, Ma'at, Sekhmet, we see parts of ourselves. And in each journey, the loss of the eye, its restoration, the weighing of the heart, the transformation of wrath into grace, we are shown not what to believe, but how to become. These are not gods of ancient Egypt alone. These are archetypes that pulse in the blood of every seeker, whispering across time, see. Remember. Awaken. It is one thing to read of myths and mysticism, to feel the electricity of ancient symbols vibrating through story and stone. But what does it really mean, to live this knowledge, to allow the lost Egyptian art of inner sight to rise through your modern breath and shape the choices of your waking life? If the Eye of Horus, the light of the Duat, the whispers of Thoth and the balance of Ma'at are not just cultural artifacts but encoded instructions for human awakening, then their true purpose is not in preservation but in activation. The third eye, after all, is not a museum piece. It is a living frequency, and your life is the temple in which it hums. To integrate this vision into daily life, one must first unlearn the notion that awakening is reserved for the extraordinary. The ancients understood something that modernity often forgets: the sacred is not a distant peak to climb, but a dimension waiting to be tuned into, like a forgotten song beneath the noise of civilization. Your third eye does not activate in a dramatic flash of lightning or by retreating to a monastery. It awakens subtly, rhythmically, like the slow unfurling of a lotus in the darkness. This is why the Egyptians placed so much emphasis on ritual, not as superstition but as repetition with sacred intent. Through rhythm, the soul remembers. Even now, your breath is a portal. Every inhale mirrors the intake of divine essence, every exhale, a release of illusion. The breath was seen as the Ka, the vital force, the vehicle through which life animates matter. To become aware of it is to step into the present moment, where the third eye begins its quiet work. Try this, not a forced meditation, but a simple presence. Observe your breath like one would observe the rising of the sun on the Nile. Not with effort, but with reverence. Let the inner waters still. In that stillness, the eye begins to stir. And the eye, once stirred, begins to see not only visions, but patterns. You notice the cyclic nature of emotion, the illusions woven by fear, the way time seems to fracture under stress but stretch open under love. You begin to recognize that the world is not entirely solid, that reality responds not only to force but to focus. This recognition isn't abstract, it begins to shift your very perception of relationships, goals, anxieties. You become less reactive. You listen with new ears. You see through the mask that others wear, and you start to gently unfasten your own. One of the most profound implications of the Egyptian teaching is the insistence that seeing is not passive. To truly see is to take responsibility for what one sees. The third eye does not merely perceive, it harmonizes. It weaves the chaotic threads of life into a mandala of meaning. When faced with conflict, an unawakened mind seeks blame. But the eye of wisdom asks, what is the deeper dance here? What part of me is being reflected in this moment? This shift alone, subtle, quiet, has the power to end cycles of unconscious suffering and bring clarity where there was once confusion. And consider the body, not as a burden, but as a temple, just as the Egyptians taught. They did not separate mind from matter. The third eye, they believed, was not disconnected from the flesh, but revealed through it. Thus, the way you nourish yourself matters. Not in the obsessive sense, but in the sacred. What you consume, in food, in media, in thought, either muddies or clarifies the inner vision. Lightness, purity, simplicity, these are not restrictions, they are signals, gently tuning the inner instrument toward the frequency of awakening. Ma'at lives in this alignment. Sound, too, was key to their practice. Chanting, singing, the intonation of sacred vowels, these were technologies for tuning the body and mind. Even modern science now acknowledges the power of sound to alter brainwave states, to entrain consciousness. But the ancients already knew, certain frequencies open gateways. A hum in the chest. A vibration behind the brow. A simple tone, repeated with intention, becomes a bridge. Try humming the sound N and N in the back of your throat while breathing deeply. Not because it's a trick, but because it calls something home. Because sound, when offered from stillness, opens doors. Dreams, too, were sacred. Not discarded fragments of the day, but messages from the Duat. The third eye does not sleep. In fact, it often sees more in sleep than in waking. Egyptian initiates were trained to remember their dreams, to walk within them consciously, to receive visions from the unseen realms. You, too, can begin to attend. Keep a journal beside your bed. Upon waking, before the world's noise floods in, record what images remain. They may make no sense at first. But over time, a language will emerge, one only your soul can speak. The eye watches through symbols. Above all, however, the greatest integration comes through attention. Not scattered, anxious attention, but sacred attention. To truly see is not to constantly look for something extraordinary, but to see the ordinary as infused with light. The patterns on a leaf. The rhythm of footsteps. The silence between two notes of music. These moments are not trivial. They are cracks in the veil. The Egyptians called this awareness Heka, a word often translated as magic, but more accurately understood as activating the energy through word, will, and presence. When you speak with intention, when you listen with depth, when you look with the eye behind the eyes, you are practicing Heka. You are walking the priest's path, in a world that no longer builds temples, but still desperately needs them. So yes, in practical terms, eat cleanly, move mindfully, breathe deeply. Sleep with purpose. Speak less, but mean more. But more importantly, walk each day as though the gods still dwell in stone and sky, and within you. Let every interaction be a ritual. Let every still moment be a sanctuary. The activation of the third eye is not an escape, it is an embrace. It is the courage to see all things clearly, and still choose compassion. We are not far from the ancient ones. Their glyphs are etched in our dreams, their temples echo in our bones. They have left the door ajar. What remains is to walk through, not by running, but by remembering. Remembering who you are when the illusions fall away. Remembering that vision is not a gift granted to the few, but a birthright reawakened by the sincere. So here you are, at the threshold where ancient myth meets living breath, where symbols once etched in limestone begin to shimmer behind your eyelids, whispering not of the past but of what still sleeps inside you. The journey has been long, not in miles, but in memory. For what you've sought is not some foreign power, not some esoteric flame to be borrowed from forgotten gods. What you've touched is a reflection, rippling out from the silent core of your being. The third eye, that hidden jewel of perception, has always been yours. It has only awaited the quiet, unwavering return of your awareness. Let us not mistake this moment for a mere conclusion. What has unfolded is not a chapter ending, but a portal opening. The ancient Egyptians did not bury secrets, they planted them. Like seeds, they buried truths beneath symbols, beneath stone and silence, knowing the time would come when one's inner soil would be ready to bloom again. That time is now. Not because history has summoned it, but because your presence has. Because something in you has refused the flatness of the visible world and begun to remember the music behind the veil. And what does this music sing of? It sings of vision that sees not the surface, but the soul. Of eyes that recognize divinity not only in the temples of Egypt or the geometry of stars, but in a stranger's gaze, in a child's laugh, in the mirror at dusk. The activation of the third eye is not a light show, it is a deepening. A softening. A listening so complete that truth has no choice but to emerge. The light you seek does not burn with intensity, it glows from stillness, from balance, from the remembrance that all things, even the chaos, are secretly in order. You now understand that this vision is not for escape. It is for embodiment. The ancients taught that true seeing changes how you walk, how you speak, how you touch the world. You don't just become awake, you become aligned. This is Ma'at, living not as a concept, but as your daily rhythm. You begin to act from center. To speak with clarity. To forgive, not because it's noble, but because it is clear seeing. You begin to serve the world not by sacrificing yourself, but by becoming yourself completely, without distortion. The modern world, wrapped in distraction and digital illusion, is the perfect training ground. Do not resent it. See through it. Love more sharply because of it. Let the noise train your silence. Let the chaos carve out your stillness. This is the paradox the ancients understood so well, that in the heart of confusion lies the possibility for deepest clarity. And clarity is what the third eye offers, not prediction, not psychic novelty, but truth. The kind of truth that burns away self-deception. The kind of truth that leaves you lighter, clearer, freer. And so, what now? What does one do with this awakened eye? You live differently. You begin to track the unseen. You treat every moment as sacred architecture. You remember that the temples were not merely built by hands, they were carved into human consciousness. When you walk slowly, speak truthfully, and love unconditionally, you rebuild those temples, this time, not in stone, but in the subtle radiance of your own being. Perhaps the most important teaching of all is this: you do not need to try to open the third eye. You need only to stop closing it. The fear, the rush, the judgment, the denial, these are the curtains. When you release them, even momentarily, light floods in. Awareness sharpens. The illusion of separation dissolves. And you see, not with your eyes, but with your eye. That is the real awakening, not seeing more, but being less blind. The eye is ancient, but your seeing is fresh. In you, the past converges with presence. You are the living continuation of the mystery schools, the walking extension of pyramidal knowledge, the breathing flame of a wisdom that could never be fully buried. Whether or not you kneel before altars or speak in sacred names matters little. What matters is the depth of your attention. The sacred is wherever you are truly here. Let this not end in inspiration but in initiation. Let your ordinary life become the temple. Let your smallest habits become rituals. Let your silence become the altar upon which true vision arrives. And when you next feel the familiar fog of forgetfulness descending, when the world once more wraps itself around your eyes like gauze, remember the words not written but lived by the ancient ones: you are the eye. You are the sky. And what you seek is already watching you. The veil has been thinned. The symbols remembered. The temple has been rebuilt within. Now, walk it. Live it. Become it. The third eye does not ask to be opened. It asks to be honored. and in that honoring, it awakens.